What's going on, people? Myke C-Town here with another episode of Out of My Element, where you guys get to pick the albums that I review. The idea is to toss me something I'm not really familiar with, so I learn something new and you guys get a fresh take on an album that you may already enjoy. But this time we're doing Father John Misty's Pure Comedy, and I'm already familiar with Father John Misty. I used to date this girl who loved his music, and even though she's a total shitball, I tried to not let that affect how I felt about Tillman's music. I'd heard an album here and there, as well as a couple of Fleet Foxes albums. I heard I Love You Honey Bear when it came out in 2015, and while I enjoyed it, it just wasn't something that I cared to return to. So when this album came out, I checked out a few of the songs, but I didn't care to listen to the rest of it. But the album won, so let's do this. Alright, so the first song, which is titled Pure Comedy, it sounds like fucking Neil Diamond, and I hate Neil Diamond. The tone of the vocals, the piano, the really subtle drums, I just found it to be a bit too lifeless for my enjoyment and not very intriguing. What saved this song for me was the lyrics. The religious criticism in that second verse I found to be brilliant. Oh, their religions are the best, they worship themselves, yet they're totally obsessed with risen zombies, celestial virgins, magic tricks, these unbelievable outfits, and they get terribly upset when you question their sacred texts written by woman-hating epileptics. This is such a brilliant way to sarcastically downplay everything that religion is built upon, so much so that I found it to be incredibly humorous while still being extremely poignant. I also really like this line. These mammals are hell-bent on fashioning new gods so they can go on being godless animals. The idea that people keep creating new gods to make new rules to continue justifying their debaucherous activities, I found that to be really well done. The next song, Total Entertainment Forever, was far more up my alley musically. It sounded like a great mixture of Jim Croce mixed with Bob Dylan, mixed with the Beatles. It was one of the most upbeat songs on the album, and the instrumentation was just great. I feel like his vocal tones went great with this style, much more than the extremely subdued and restrained sounds. The next song on the album that I actually really enjoyed was The Ballad of the Dying Man. This is such a great subject for a song. The idea of an extremely self-important man who spends his life critiquing the world and thinks that his critique is so beneficial to the world around him that it's actually going to be a detriment when he dies because that critique will no longer be there. It's such a great commentary on the self-importance of many of us in today's world. A Bigger Paper Bag was a nice change of pace. It almost sounded like an Elliott Smith cover, which is fine. It's an interesting song about a man being super narcissistic, very self-obsessed, but he also uses alcohol and drugs as a way of protecting himself from the outside world, maybe even to keep people from bursting his conceited bubble. And I thought this line was great. Dance like a butterfly and drink like a fish if you're bent on taking demons down with only your fist. Clearly a twist on the Muhammad Ali quote, but hinting at someone who may have mental demons, but instead of dealing with those properly, which is to address the mind, he just deals with what's easier, and that's the physical world. The Memo was another interesting song, a mellow guitar ballad with some nice string work, and it has one of my favorite lines of the whole album. Just between you and me, here at the cultural low water mark, if it's fraud or art, they'll pay you to believe. And I also really like this line as well. And as the world is getting smaller, small things take up all your time. Narcissist would have a field day if he could have got online. Narcissist, the person who the word narcissist comes from, who was the person who fell in love with his own image and stared at himself until he died. So the idea of how someone like him would love having something like Instagram or Twitter, which is mostly full of self-congratulatory bullshit, was just really clever to me. In 20 Years or So is another guitar ballad that has a nice build-up with a lot of string and piano elements thrown in there that make for a song a bit more compelling than a lot of the others on this album, and I'm gonna keep talking about the lines here. I like this one. Oh, I read somewhere that in 20 years, more or less, the human experiment will reach its violent end, but I look at you as our second drinks arrive, the piano player is playing This Must Be the Place, and it's a miracle to be alive. This harkens back to the Ballad of the Dying Man, the idea of someone critiquing the world up until right before he dies and he realized that he's just as ignorant and insignificant as everyone else. But in this song here, we have the idea that Josh Tillman is the man who just spent a whole album criticizing the world around him, only to, at the very end, realize that as long as you have the things that you love, you know, your significant other, a good drink, that everything else is going to be okay. So this album is a bit long. 70 minutes of this is a bit too much for me. A few of the songs I feel like could have been shaved. I think Birdie was a bit boring. There was nothing really separating it from other songs on the album. I felt the same way about the song When the God of Love Returns, There'll Be Hell to Pay. And I felt that Leaving LA was an ambitious idea, but I didn't really need 13 minutes of it. Especially when I feel like it didn't really go anywhere. It just kind of drudges on the whole time. And that's not me saying that these songs are bad. That's me saying that I didn't feel like these songs were essential to the album. I get that he's saying fuck you to being entertained, because he kind of feels like we're already being a bit too entertained in our own little boring bubbles. You know, so entertained that we're not really paying attention to the subtleties or the bigger pictures around us. So he's stripping away that element of obvious entertainment and going for more of a provocative edge, you know, one that you have to actually focus on. And I like the confrontational nature of this album. The fact that Tillman is willing to put his politics and his social ideas out in the open regardless of who he offends. You know, this is something that you don't always see from this type of artist, or especially an artist of his stature and popularity. And I think that that's really refreshing. However, a few of the lines did come off a bit trollish, like the line about fucking Taylor Swift in virtual reality. So that kind of hurts the seriousness of the album, which I think is probably the point. These complex lyrics with really interesting backgrounds and narratives over these really stripped back and mellow instrumentals, it all adds up to a really interesting idea. But my problem is the journey itself it comes off a bit dull for me. If it weren't for the lyrics being so great on this album, there's very little chance that I'd find anything at all intriguing about it. I don't mind mellow albums. I think my issue with this, at some points, I'm not really pulling any real emotion or passion from it. I'm just getting snark and cynicism. And considering who I am, you'd think I'd love that, but I just don't get much from his voice or his delivery. And that's not to say his voice is bad by any means, because it's not. But it just feels very subdued here. I feel like I get more from albums from Wooden Wand or Phosphorescent or Bill Callahan than I do from this. This is an album that's absolutely drenched and drowning in pretentiousness, which is also probably the point. And I do love me some pretentious music, but I think that this album is much better enjoyed as a poetry book than it is as a piece of music. The lyrics are brilliant here. It's just the musical backdrop that does very little for me. So that's how I felt about this album. It's not bad, it's just not enough to make me return to it again. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down there. And if you want to join the party, which helps pick the albums that get reviewed in Out of My Element, make sure you guys become a patron. The link is down there in the description section. But yeah, that's it for this. Hope you guys enjoyed it. As usual, thank you for living, thank you for loving, thank you for being you. And I'll see you guys next time. Alright, peace, bitches.